If you're just repeating something 5 times, that's not going to be enough in a given day that a kid's going to get it in 2, 3 days. Because the brain needs to hear it and then be able to process it.
The skill that we cannot go without is following direction. The power of the routine is it repeats itself every single day. You do not have to figure out the first day. It's probably going to take you a week or two to understand where your child level is. The way we build that strong neural connection is repeat, repeat, repeat.
Being able to label your environment is crucial for communication and to reduce unwanted behavior. In today's episode of Fight for 15 Minutes, we're going to deep dive into receptive skills, what they are, and how you can be empowered to use them in the home environment. Welcome to the Parent Empowerment Coaching Tribe. My name is Michael Conti. Hello, Dr. Qian. It is good chatting to you.
Good morning.
So with that, we always like to try to define what we're discussing to really help us to know what to do with it. So in its simplest terms, let's talk about receptive language. What is it? And what are some examples of receptive language skills?
Well, I think a lot of parents are not unfamiliar with the receptive language. Really, it's just about your child's ability to understand what someone says, right? Like simple example, come over, put your shoes away, put on your shoes. Oh, where is the cookie? Show me the cookie. And your child ability to be able to understand those directions. And when you read a book, and then when you say, oh, find a bear. Oh, I see a fish. Where is the fish? And understand what you are saying to your child. That is what receptive language is about.
I definitely heard in there about receptive, but also heard it helps with direction following.
Yes.
The fact that someone knows where it is. So it feels like it's a foundational skill that kind of leads into some of these areas. What are some of the things that parents should look at in toddlers and preschool children to gauge their receptive language?
It's receptive language is something that happened way before a child is able to speak. And in research, we have seen a child who is able to understand a lot of things, and then they start to have single word. And we see the single word around the 12 month of age, but before that period of time, your child is learning receptive language. And think about the joint attention piece, and we talk about in one of our podcasts, right? Like the idea of the triangle, think about you said, oh, where is the fish on the book? And then you have a shared interest, which is in this case is the book, and the mom, and then your little one. And when you say, oh, look, there is a book, and you're really trying to direct your child attention to something else on that book. And then what you ask your child to do is really following direction, right? Like the receptive language. Oh, look, there is a red fish. And then the point gesture, and your child be able to say, okay, let me look where the fish is. So one of a big milestone we're talking about here is be able to intending you, the mom, the adult in the environment, and be able to follow that gestural or facial lead and really be able to look at you and look at what you are asking your child to do. And then another milestone is, I laugh at this because, I don't think a lot of middle schoolers can do this, is when you say no, that child actually stop doing what he is supposed to do, what she's supposed to do. So the idea of stop for a moment when mom said, no, stop, that's very hot, don't touch, right? Be able to pause at that moment when someone tell you no. And then around the 10 or 12 month of age, and what we're looking for is, say you have a guest in your house and you said, hey, say goodbye. So bye-bye to uncle, and your child be like, okay, waving, right? Hey, look at mommy, look at what I got. And then your child is able to shift attention from whatever your child was looking earlier to you, back to joint attention. That's why joint attention is so important. And then around 13 to 18 months, this is where you start to ask like where question, and then your child start to understand what you're trying to ask. Where is our cat? Where is the dog? And then your child start to look around and to find something. And This is a memory that I had is when there is a kid who was very young, and I think it's a 14 month, and there's not much language. And I remember there's a three people sitting at the desk, and then he was eating something, and someone said, maybe mom want to take a bite. Guess what? He picked up his little spoon and he gave it to mom, right? Like, hey, he understood what was going on. And the mom said, oh, I don't want to have a bite. And maybe dad want a bite. And then guess what? He gave it to dad, right? So those are
Mhm.
around that period of time, you start to see the receptive language. Well, when a child is 2 years old, for children who do not have any disability, who are developing, just hit every milestone, and we see that they start to understand at least 50 different words. We're talking about the words from different category: toy, food, animal, body parts, touch your toes, not problem. So this is super important milestone. When you start to understand 50 different words, again, this number is not magic. It's just a ballpark here. And then you start to understand concept like, oh, these are vegetables, these are fruit, these are animals. And when you be able to understand the concept, it help you to be able to answer a question like, what color is this? In order to answer that question, you have to understand what meant by color. And then your child's ability to be able to, understand red, yellow, green, help him to understand, oh, all those things is called color. All those things are called color. And that's when we start to see single word and phrases.
I love how you really broke down where receptive fits. And, kind of the light bulb that kind of went off for me, receptive is a fundamental pillar of direction following. Meaning, if a
Absolutely.
child doesn't
Mhm.
have a strong base of knowing what things are, it's going to be really hard for them to execute listening skills. Even knowing, right? So, what we're talking about, the brain loves things in categories. And what receptive is really building the library. These are all the colors: blue, yellow, black. So when they hear the black, all of a sudden that neuron in the color category lights up, and now they can observe it in the environment. So it is a really an important aspect that they need to know what shoes are before you start asking them to go get their shoes, because that's the link. So really thinking out loud, receptive really is brain clarity. They know exactly what's happening and they can receive that image. Now, when they hear the auditory, they can now use the action. So receptive goes into, once you have receptive fundamental, it goes into direction following. And of course, we also know receptive is the fundamental for communication. You need to know what the shoes are so that the child can then ask for the shoes. And this is where it doesn't matter if your child is verbal or nonverbal. That's why receptive is very powerful, is that once they have the fundamentals, now you can ask them a question through direction following and they're able to respond. But on the other hand, they can now initiate, hey, I want to go outside. Where's my shoes? And be able to do those things. And so I think we don't give receptive its credit. A child or a young human needs to have enough of the skills, and then with that, put into categories to be able to do both of those functions.
I love the idea of thinking about this as different shelves on in the library, right? Like there is a fiction, there's nonfiction, and then really the receptive is, oh, this is the color and this is toys, and we teach that in a very systematic way. And think about if right now your little one is 3 or 4 years old, very soon it will be in preschool and the kindergarten, and the number one skill is probably pretty much follow direction. I remember when I work with the teachers, "Hi, what's wrong with Johnny?" And then teacher always says most of the time, well, Johnny is not following directions. And that's what school is about, right? Like transition from one activity to another. That's come to the carpet. Oh, we're gonna do a group activity. Everyone gonna draw a fish using a marker. Time to get your marker. Oh, what is the color of the head? And all of this is really asking a lot from our kids. And the skill that we cannot go without is following direction. When teachers say, come to the carpet, you have to understand what come means. It's not saying you should jump, it's saying come to the carpet. And then the carpet, you're not going to the sand table, you're coming to the carpet. And this is not an easy skill because in an environment, it's at home or at school, you have a lot of things that have names. Go to the fridge, get your milk. Well, in the kitchen, there's a countertop, there's a fridge, there's a microwave, there's drawer, and your child has to be has to be able to know, oh, fridge means that thing, the big rectangle thing where we keep the food, and ignore other things in the environment, such as microwave, be able to understand, oh, microwave is not what mom asking. Mom is asking for refrigerator, fridge. This is super hard for the kid. And think about if I have a picture of a fridge, I point at you and I say to you, find a fridge. You can look at that cue the whole time I'm asking you that question. Look at the fridge. Here's a picture. Just find something look like this in the environment. But if I don't have the picture, which is often the case in school, come to the carpet. Your brain has to be able to say, okay, the word carpet means that little square in front of the smart TV. This is not an easy skill, and this skill relies on a lot of prerequisites such as joint attention, be able to attend, be able to kind of almost ignore other things going on in the environment, understand right now the thing I need to pay attention is mom's word, fridge or carpet.
It's almost that neuron needs to be strong enough to remember what it's supposed to do. And we've all had that thing, right? You ask a kid to go do something, they take 3 steps, and then they just kind of get lost, right? They start to wander away. And maybe that is that connection. A stronger receptive skill helps to remember, fridge. And so then it allows you to get to the fridge and then get to the next step, open or whatever activity. So it's really showing the important role that receptive plays. And so with that, how do parents figure out their child's receptive language level?
When I think about assessing receptive language, it's really coming back to the routine. The first question we often ask parents is, especially parents of very young children, is like, hey, tell me about when Johnny came back from daycare. What are the routine? What does Johnny do? And mom will say, well, he want a snack. We get snack ready, and we'll play for a little bit, and then he likes our cat, and he will we'll read a book together. By the time reading the book, dad will be at home and dad will play with him while I cook. So we start to have an idea about, okay, what are some like big activities Johnny does when he gets home from daycare? And then we'll focus on one routine. So for example, is taking a bath. And then we'll start to ask parents to do some simple directions during that period of time. The floating toys, the duck, the frog, and like, oh, where is the frog? And be able to see where, he pays attention and start to use those routine. Because the power of the routine is it repeats itself every single day. You do not have to figure out the first day. It's probably going to take you a week or two to understand where your child level is, even longer than that. And with the routine is that, it's Monday to Friday and your kid may have to take a bath every day. And those are your opportunity to assess different targets and figure out whether he understand the animals, whether he understand the different things in the bathroom. About receptive language, and I also want to say this, one exercise I often ask parents to do is you try to learn a new language on Duolingo and pick up a language you do not really know at all. Okay. And then you start to monitor your own behavior. How many times do you have to listen to Duolingo until you understand 你好 means hello in Chinese or 娃娃 means doll in Chinese? And think about your own child. That's why the way we build that strong neural connection is repeat, 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 and don't feel discouraged if you, during your routine, you're like, oh, my kid did not even know the word frog. And I taught him Monday, Tuesday, he still did not get it when I was, asking him during the bath time. And when you feel that way, think about how many times do you have to hear that language in order for you to learn that word in a brand new language.
I like that you hit on this topic. I know for me, working on the provider side and training staff and seeing a lot of little kids, this is one that I really talk about with folks because the kids don't get enough repetition. So, well, what happens a lot because the kids don't respond as much, especially young kids with special needs, we stop playing all those comments. Hey, look, here's the orange frog. Orange frog. Hey, here's the green frog. Hey, look, this is blue. And because we stop giving that input, it just goes to like learning a new language. A lot of these kids just don't get enough repetition on what blue is, on what a frog is, on what a chair is. And so I'm a big fan, especially for those that do any type of therapies. If you're just repeating something 5 times, that's not going to be enough in a given day that a kid's going to get it, in 2-3 days. Because the brain needs to hear it, just like learning a new language, and then be able to process it. So one of the big takeaways is for you to, essentially you're doing karaoke, is you're going to be saying some of these things over and over again with enthusiasm, with excitement, and especially rewarding when you start to see them acknowledge it, understand it, or be curious about it. I think is very important for folks not to give up so early, expecting a kid to magically learn it. And then with that, you talked about the kind of the checklist for parents. In a given day, really analyze what are some of the important things that are just in your home and almost kind of make what's the most important, anywhere from 10, maybe at most 20 to kind of start with. And then really say, when you say shoes, do they even acknowledge, they even turn, do they pay attention? And that can give you kind of an insight. So whether something is very weak, meaning they don't understand it at all, weak, maybe middle or strong, or however you want to determine, I think that gives you a starting point. So I can definitely see where you spend about a week and just really key on those 20 things, and kind of that will give you a good idea of what types of things, or more importantly, you'll probably notice some types of categories are really strong. Probably the food ones are always a good place to look at. And then there's some of these other categories that are very, very weak. And I can see that being a very good jumping point on how you can systematically work on receptive skills.